Good morning, and welcome to another Seize the Day. Um, I trust you guys are waking up, feeling refreshed, and ready to begin a new day. Today's a little overcast here in Italy. We're on the coast of Sorrento, and had an opportunity yesterday to visit the island of Capri, and it was really hilly, very steep, but surprisingly a little different in some of the coastal towns that we've already visited, in the sense that it had a little bit more lushness to it, a lot more flowers and greenery, and not just tile and buildings, but it was a cool little environment to be in. We took a ride on one of their taxis that brought us up to the top of the peak there, and it was quite treacherous, actually. it, it's amazing to me how people drive around here, and especially with their scooters. And we're not just talking about young kids; we're talking about all ages. They're on their scooters on these very steep, windy roads with buses coming down, passing each other on these lanes. It really is uh, an experience. So we're here. Things are going well, and I'm glad that you're in this, waking up with me this morning, and I'm glad to be doing it. Every day feels a little stronger. I have just a prayer request that I want to mention, and my son Jake, my youngest boy, got married to a young girl named Riley Hopkins. Riley Hopkins and her dad Ryan and Sue, as her parents, Ryan and Sue. Well, Ryan has had liver failure and has been placed on a immediate transplant list. And he's a young man. He's only about 55 years of age, and but his health is in serious decline. And these things have happened so quickly that they have evolved, and now they have him on a list, and he's hoping to receive a liver transplant imminently. And so I just pray that you would just keep Ryan, a young bride, just so concerned about her dad as all of us would be. Sue, they're, they really do love Jesus, and they understand the challenges that this life brings. But it's still, when it's your dad, it's it's really close to home. So if you wouldn't mind praying for Ryan, that would be awesome. And I know that God, who is good all the time, will do what is right. And so and good, and we're going to be there for the family throughout all of these kind of experiences. So having said that, I want to turn our attention to what is our theme for this week, and that is the book of Deuteronomy, turning up the volume. This particular morning, we are looking at a passage that's found in Deuteronomy chapter 5. And in Deuteronomy chapter 5, it's a very interesting chapter, because Deuteronomy chapter 5 now is giving us a second view at the Ten Commandments. Ten Commandments that were given to us through Moses, right? But actually, as we took a closer look, the account of the very first giving of the Ten Commandments is found in Exodus chapter 19. And in Exodus chapter 19, what we find is God personally delivers those Ten Commandments. Not only does he say in terms of, speaking directly to the people, but it's also by his own finger that he writes the tablets and then presents them to Moses. From that point on, Moses is the communicator now of those commandments to his people. But from day one, God established this covenant with his people personally. And he did so because he says, I want you to understand who I am. I am the Lord God, right? There is no other. I am the one who delivered you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. So God's acts of compassion and graciousness have preceded anything that the Israelites would do. It's not like they were earning their way into this kingdom of heaven. God had opened up the doors, and invited them in. And so consequently, now a whole generation later, that generation didn't live up to that covenant. And who suffered the consequences? They suffered the consequences. They wound up wandering in a wilderness for 40 years. Now everything has changed. This next generation is appears to be up for the challenge. We've already, in our early studies in the book of Deuteronomy, have discovered that they have taken on some of the giants that were in the land, the giants that kind of put the first generation in a position of rebellion. Right? They would not go. They would not take this land. But this generation seems up for that challenge. They have already defeated Shihan and Og, not not on their own. The same promise that was given to them was given to their parents. It wasn't like this generation is stronger, more military wise. No, no, no. God says the battles belong to me. But in faith, if you go out believing, He says, I will do for you exactly what I've done in taking you out of Egypt. You just got to trust me. And they showed that unfaithfulness, where this generation seems to be more motivated to listen to what Moses is instructing them. And so now we come to this passage here in Deuteronomy 5, where he begins to reiterate for us the Ten Commandments. And this morning, what I'd like to do is I would just like to couch these commandments in the setting in which we find them, because very often what I discover is that when people talk about the Ten Commandments, it becomes this list that we put up on a wall, on a plaque, right, and we refer to, and they're completely removed from the historical context in which we find them. And the reason why that is important is because we're going to discover that what God is communicating to that generation in that context is an opportunity now to see how those words are being shaped so that they could fit their particular context. So, for instance, thou shalt not steal, right? But think about how stealing is done in our generation. And you have, people steal others' identity, right? You have cyber theft. There's numerous ways that stealing can go on, and causing, you know, I know, for instance, there was a time, and my wife and I, our accounts were compromised, and man, what a headache that was to try to get everything straightened out. Eventually, they did, but they put all kinds of stops on your finances, and you have to wait. And oh boy, it was just a mess, and all because somebody hacked into our accounts, and so you have to get all this protection now. So you see what I mean? Is like the law, thou shalt not steal, when we begin to understand a little bit more of what God's mindset was behind all of this, it gives us a greater appreciation for how these laws were meant to be protective. They were meant to give us some kind of background now to understanding something about what's going on inside the heart of God. So the Ten Commandments were given to a people who, consider this, 3 months previously, and this is going back to Exodus 19, right? Not this particular context here in Deuteronomy 5. So the first time these commandments were given, they were given to that first generation that was coming out of Egypt. And that first generation, all they had known was slavery. For the past 400 years, they had been placed as slaves under Egyptian rule. So think about that. Generation after generation after generation, all you know is rights that are limited, aspirations that are curtailed, right? You have no rights, and you're crying out for some kind of deliverance here. You're wondering how this is ever going to happen when you're slaves and Egypt is so mighty. until that day that God says, I've heard the cries of my people. And he calls Moses. And he says, Moses, I want you to go down and I want you to tell Pharaoh, let my people go. And that began this whole experience between the Lord and Pharaoh and the miracles that were brought forth until finally God delivers Israel out of the hands of Egypt, delivers them into their own land, and all of these things change, right? So all they understand now in this context is this idea that they are politically, economically, socially, and spiritually now in bondage. And so here they are liberated from that. So now how are they going to organize their own community? How is this liberated people going to preserve the benefits of all that God now is calling for them here in this text? So the very first thing here in Deuteronomy 5:7, it says, "You shall have no other gods before me." That's the first of these 10 commandments. And so Pharaoh, think about this. Pharaoh considered himself divine. You know, there is a passage in Exodus 5:2 where Pharaoh says, "Who is the Lord that I should obey him and let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, and I will not let Israel go." God had to prove himself to Pharaoh and to all of Egypt, and he did. And all such that in Exodus chapter 7, the Egyptians, God says, will know that I am the Lord when I stretch out my hand against Egypt and bring the Israelites out of it. So everything that God was doing was to showcase that there is no other. And so now here you have a people who were raised in an environment where they were meant to pay homage to this Pharaoh. And now God is saying, yeah, like, I don't want you to continue that behavior because as I've already demonstrated to you, Pharaoh has no power over me. And I am the one who called you. And I am the one now who is establishing a covenant with you. How easy is that to displace that kind of confidence? If all your life you're growing up thinking, you know what I really need here is what I really need is I need to figure out how I can get in Pharaoh's good graces. How somehow or another, if I could just get Pharaoh to to throw me a bone, right? To just do me a favor, to just get on his good side. Somehow or another, all of these things would result in in me, finding a situation better for me and for my family. God says, no, no, no. I'm the one that you need to be paying attention to now, because I will bless you. I'm going to give you this land. I'm going to give you prosperity. I'm going to give you descendants so that all of you begin to grow and flourish now that you know that the Lord is good. So, so this one thing right here, there is no other gods. Man, there is a plethora of gods all around them. And now God is calling them to a completely different source of authority, a completely different orientation than one that they had been growing up with. And their parents and their parents before them and their parents before them. Now, you come to Deuteronomy 5:8, and in Deuteronomy 5:8, verse 8, it says, "This is the second commandment: you shall not make for yourselves an idol in the form of anything, in heaven above, or on the earth beneath, or in the waters below." And again, if Pharaoh thought of himself as divine, there were these whole vast arrays of idols in Egypt. And they were all the types of plagues that visited Egypt. God was saying to these people, listen, I don't want you to get caught up in worshiping the creation here. I want you to rise above this. I am the creator of all that exists. Why are you going to bow down to birds and fish and animals, or even the human likenesses of man like Pharaoh? Especially when I've already demonstrated the power that you have seen for yourselves. There's another text here that's found in well, let's just go do the third commandment, then we'll get to this. The third command, right, is not to misuse the name of the Lord your God. the the name of God was to be taken seriously, because the name of God represented who He is and what He does, His character, right, His attributes. It's like, what do you think if people in your name misrepresent you? It doesn't feel good, does it? They're telling lies about you, or they're presenting you in such a light that isn't very favorable, or they're attributing, things to you uh, uh, that that are not true, cannot be verified. God's saying, when you represent me to the world, I don't want you to misuse my name. I want you to understand who I am and what I do. And otherwise, you're going to find yourself misunderstanding who I am, and then you're going to give yourselves over again to the serving of idols and to the serving of other gods, and taking on other authorities in your life. And the next thing you know, your heart begins to be kind of pulled further and further away from the things of God. And isn't that how it happens in a culture? I mean, we may not have these little stick wooden idols in our living rooms, right? Some do, but for the vast majority here living in the states, um, you might have little replicas of something, but not to the vast array that Egypt did with its various gods. Here is now the God who says, "There is no other like me. There is, you are to have no idols before me, because I am the maker of heaven and earth. I've made everything. My power is supreme. And conversely, don't misrepresent me before the world." And so, um, when Moses says, "I'm going to go and tell these people that the Lord sent me," who am I going to say sent me? And he says, "I want you to say to the Israelites, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, has sent me. This is my name forever, the name by which I am to be remembered from generation to generation." And so this is what God is supposed to be doing now on behalf of all of these people. Then I want you to think about this in terms of the Great Commission that we've studied when we were looking through the Gospel of Matthew. At the end of Jesus, after he represents, after he demonstrates his authority in word and in deed, after it is demonstrated that he is the fulfillment of the promise that God had made all the way back, to Israel, that this Messiah that they had promised, that would be this great deliverer, he would come. Jesus now demonstrates, not only by his posterity, the line in which Jesus came, but his authority in the things that he has done and in his teaching, right? His miracles that he performs, all of this, at the end of the day, rising from the dead, he gathers all of his disciples and says to them in this great commissioning, "Listen, I want you to go now into the world. I want you to represent me. I want you to make disciples of all the nations. I want you to baptize them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Spirit." The revelation that Jesus gives us now of this one triune God who has manifested himself as Father, Son, and Spirit. The Father who willed all of this to be, and Jesus who came and brought it to pass, and the Holy Spirit now who applies it into one's life. If you read the book of Ephesians, the New Testament book of Ephesians, just read from verses 3 to about verse 15, and you'll see there how this subject changes from the Father to the Son to the Spirit. And Jesus is saying, "Look, this revelation that I have given to you now of who God is, I want you to take that with you, and I want people to become identified now with this God who is the same yesterday, today, and forever. He's the same God that manifested himself to Moses and now has taken on this flesh and come and given you a visible look at what was worshipped invisibly." So this whole idea of of, um, of representing the fullness of who God is by his own words and revelation, isn't that what Jesus is giving to us as well? Go out into the world make disciples of all the nations, baptize them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and then what? Teach them to obey whatsoever things I have commanded you. How is that any different than what Moses is now seeking to bestow upon those followers now who find themselves perched on the promise of this new land and this new future? And as they're getting ready to embrace that, having come from a past that is so, um, you know, filled with um, uh, a lot of scars and pain and brokenness, God's saying, "No, this is a new beginning. Let me tell you how to embrace that." And then He begins to do this. Listen to rule number 4 when He says, "I want you to observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy, as the Lord your God has commanded you. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it," now notice what it says here, "you shall not do any work, and neither you nor your son or daughter, your manservant, maidservant, not even the ox, your donkey, or any of the animals, nor the alien that's even within your gates, so that your manservant and maidservant may rest as you do. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and that the Lord your God brought you out of there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, the Lord your God has commanded you to observe the Sabbath day." The unrelenting forced labor under Egypt. There was no rest, no freedom. Exodus 1 and 5 demonstrate that, right? It was a severe, life that the Israelites were living under the demanding whips of those taskmasters. Now, and suddenly now, what a gift there is to rest from their labor. And at the same time, you do realize that work is not a bad thing. Sometimes people, they give you this vision of heaven as if you're just going to be floating around in a cloud and doing nothing. I tell people all the time, I said, you do realize that when God first created the Garden of Eden and placed Adam and Eve in it, He gave them jobs. They were fulfilling jobs. They were jobs filled with purpose. And they were to go out and rule over the creation that God had just given them. And that creation was perfect. So why would we think it's going to be any different when we get to heaven? Only we're not going to have to fight by the sweat of our brow. We're not going to have to deal with all of the brokenness that's in the world that creates all this hostility. Not to mention the brokenness that's within a person's heart. No. So 6 days of work is not a bad thing. But the seventh day was a rest to assure that what? We don't make an idol of work. That this rest was supposed to be applied to everyone. And it was supposed to be a day in which people would begin to just remember that God was responsible for the rest that they now enjoyed. And this was in a broken world, right? This was because even though they're going into this promised land, there was still it's still going to bear the marks of the fall of humanity. But God is giving them a new start. He's saying, "Listen, I'm going to bring you in now. I'm giving you a whole new orientation. You got to stop thinking like slaves, and now recognizing you're my people." And turning that switch in one's head, man, that takes time, right? And that takes devotion, that takes understanding and knowledge. But this is part of this life of discipleship. So the fourth commandment here was one in which they were to be given, rest, and to recognize where that rest came from. How about honor your father and mother, as the Lord your God commanded you, so that you may live long, it may go well with you in the land. In Egypt, Israel had been subjected to intolerable intrusion. And not only that, there was the destruction of their family life. If you catch the early part in the book of Exodus that begins to outline all this for you, you recognize that Pharaoh was putting a limit on how many male children would could were able to survive. They wanted to kill all of the men and save the female babies, so that they would marry other Egyptian men and become more and more assimilated into this whole kingdom of Egypt. And God said, no, no, that's not how this is supposed to be. Now this Israel that God has created, right? It's supposed to be this free society. It should be structured around the network of viable, extended family households. When it says here, husbands, fathers, and mothers, we kind of think in a very isolated way sometimes here in the States, right? But in many parts of the country, and for many of you who are even watching online now, from parts of India and Africa, right? South America, family units, they live together. You honor those there, and there is a level of respect that is given. And if that begins to break down, it's felt in the whole of communal life. It's not like sometimes here in the States, you live in a block, you don't even know your neighbors. You live there for 20 some odd years, and if they don't come out of their house and say hello or invite you in, or your paths cross, you don't even see each other. Yeah, not so much in other cultures. But here, this text is telling you and me, now the fabric here of authority and communal life now is going to be the family. And God's saying, this is sacred to me. I want you to honor your fathers and mothers, that it might go well with you in the land that I'm giving you. How about you shall not murder? They had been victims of state-sponsored genocide. And now they were freed from such murderous tyranny, and they were to protect human life from all unlawful killing. That's how God looked at human life. And he says, thou shalt not kill, right? Thou shalt not murder. And yet you have to put that in the context, right? There were going to be wars. God was calling them to a war right now. But this just freely taking life, it appears here in the Ten Commandments that God was opposed to that. Not only you shall not murder, he says you shall not commit adultery. So if the family was to be respected, father and mother, it's saying here, listen, I want to maintain the integrity of that, and so consequently, you're not to commit adultery. The family was to maintain a sexual integrity, because I think God understood, right, that harm would scar the family, and within the community, emotionally, economically. This is not God's desire for families to be broken, for children to be scarred. This all happens because of the hardness of our own hearts, right? Because of circumstances of sin that enters in. I understand that. We live in a broken world. But God, this is God's ideal, right? And He's telling His people, this is what I want you to aspire to. This is what I want you to keep before you. And how far this moves in a culture now where it's lost the sacredness of this unity. We go on. It says, "Thou shalt not steal." In Israel had been economically exploited. They had been robbed of the benefit of their own productive labor, and now God's intention was for them to have a land of their own, to begin their own distinctive economic systems, within which theft seriously would violate the community dimension of this covenant. How is that for a respect of people's properties? And in the same way, the false testimony that you would give against a neighbor, or the coveting that would take place of jealousy and envy and everything that pick up 8, 9, and 10. See, all of these, when placed alongside, the experience that they just had in Egypt, and this new horizon that God was calling them to. Don't you recognize that what God's really doing is protective? He wants them to thrive. He wants them to live long in this land. And God is laying down 10 principles by which, if they were to embrace this covenant, it would begin to define how they not only dealt with God, but how they dealt with one another. And how much better off they would be because of that. Well, we're going to take another look at these commandments tomorrow, but from a different vantage point. And but I trust that even just running through those today, I hope it just reinforces you again to recognize how God, He's for us, He's not against us. And His desire is for us to go out, embrace the day, right? Seize the day, always recognizing that God is good all the time. Well, my friends, great to be with you again this morning. Feeling stronger. I hope so are you. And looking forward to spending a little time again with you tomorrow morning. God bless you, my friends, on this Thursday, October the 19th. And Lord willing, hope to see you again tomorrow. God bless.